The next bill on the agenda is House File 28. Representative Frazier, could you please come forward? So I will move House File 28 be recommended to be re-referred to the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. Welcome to the committee, Representative Frazier, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, lead committee members. I'm here today to present House File 28. House File 28 will restore the right to vote back to individuals that have been convicted of a felony but are no longer incarcerated. This bill has been around for quite some time now, and it has had bipartisan support in the past. It goes back multiple years. It has been carried by former House member Keith Ellison, former House member Bobby Joe Champion, who is now a leader on this bill in the Senate, and it has been carried by former House member Ray Dean, who will be here to testify as well today. The cornerstone of our democracy is the right to vote. That right allows for an individual to participate in the process of electing representatives and weighing in on critical ballot questions that impact their daily lives. Currently, there are over 50,000 Minnesotans who are living throughout our state that are on probation or parole. These are mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, sisters, brothers, and our neighbors who are living in the community, working to provide for their families, paying their taxes, and contributing to our state. They are people that have valuable insights and have proximity to the most pressing issues in their communities throughout Minnesota. Yet, because of a conviction in their past, these individuals are still denied the fundamental right to vote. We should seek responses to crime that do not simply punish, but also rehabilitate, heal, and restore. We must ask ourselves, if disenfranchising offenders after the justice system has concluded that they should be back working in the community and rebuilding their lives, serves any positive criminal justice outcome. Restoring voting rights to those convicted of a felony crime but no longer incarcerated is one of the ways to help facilitate reintegration into our communities by giving these individuals their voices back to participate in the electoral process. We have a representative democracy, but currently in our state, our government cannot truly be reflective and representative of all its people if certain voices continue to be shut out of the process. It is well past time to correct this. House File 28 will correct this issue. With that, Mr. Chair, I will yield to testifiers.
Thank you, Representative Frazier. We have several people who have signed up to testify. First on the list will be Wintana Melican. After Wintana Melican will be Dr. Chris Uggan. Wintana Melican, please come forward. As in the previous case, all testifiers have been asked to keep their remarks to 2 minutes, and there may be a reminder if they go over that. And then we will have member questions after testimony has concluded. So, welcome to the committee. Wintana Melican, please identify yourself first for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Hello, hi everybody. My name is Wintana Melican, a St. Paul resident. All right, go ahead and get started. Like the representative said, this piece of legislation has been around for many years. I actually began working on it in 2012. It was the first piece of legislation I had ever worked on. But moving beyond that, in 2018, I opened up my very first business. I opened up a restaurant. And when opening that restaurant, I wanted to close on Election Day. I wanted to give my staff the opportunity to go out and participate in society, participate in their civic duty. And every single one of my employees actually did not have the right to vote. As we know, many folks in the server industry have are folks that come from, our justice system, and it's often the only profession that they can get access to. All of my staffers were very hardworking, great citizens that were doing amazing work in the world and doing amazing work for me, and I couldn't even give them the ability to have the day off because they specifically asked to work. They said that they didn't want to take the day off. They wanted to be somewhere because everyone was walking around with red stickers that they could not have access to. I actually then ended up selling that restaurant. My family has since then opened 7 businesses, 7 different restaurants across the state of Minnesota, everywhere from Rochester, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and almost exclusively, majority of our staff are made up of folks who just don't have the right to vote because of these laws. Because of our massively long probation periods in our state, they have pretty much caused folks, mostly in rural Minnesota and in the Twin Cities, to not have access to the ballot. And it makes Election Day feel like a punishment, even though they've completely served their time. They're workers, they're producing taxable income for us, but yet they don't have the simple ability of participating in society as a full citizen. And so I'm really here as a business owner and as a former policy organizer to ask all of you to support this legislation. I think it greatly impacts our state to have.
Please conclude your testimony. You could say one or two more sentences.
Yeah, it's a massive loss to our state to have folks that pay taxes every single day but not have representation, especially those that we know have done reentry and have done the right thing. And so I just encourage all of you that care about business, that care about economics, that care about fair taxes and representation and equity to support this legislation. So thank you.
Wintana Melikin. Next, Dr. Chris Uggan, please come forward. After Dr. Uggan will be Ray Dean. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Chris Uggan. I'm a University of Minnesota professor of sociology, law, and public affairs, author of a book on disenfranchisement, and I speak in favor of the bill today. Since 2016, 8 states have similarly restored the vote to non-incarcerated populations. So Minnesota now ranks among the more restrictive states. The reasons for this change involve racial justice, the importance of voting as a fundamental right, and its benefits to individual and society. As a criminologist, I see voting as consistent and aligned with the goals of community supervision. Reenfranchisement, in short, would extend democracy and civil rights to about 46,000 Minnesotans, by my count, reduce racial disparity in ballot access, so that disparities in punishment do not echo outward to dilute the votes of communities of color. And I say that currently about 6% of Black and American Indian Minnesotans are disenfranchised, a rate over 5 times the white rate. It would also respond to public sentiment, as public opinion generally favors reenfranchisement for non-incarcerated populations. Would accord with international standards. No other nation has a general disenfranchisement provision for non-incarcerated individuals. It would enhance public safety, supporting the reintegrative goals of community supervision. And it would reduce confusion about eligibility and potential prosecution for unlawful voting for people who are otherwise doing quite well on probation and supervised release. Finally, it's fair that people on probation are currently disenfranchised for far longer than people incarcerated, often for much more serious crimes. So thank you for your attention to my work and to the social science research on this question.
Thank you, Dr. Uggan. Next will be former Elections Chair Ray Dean. Welcome back to the committee, Ray Dean. And after Ray Dean will be Willie Lloyd. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone, committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to what is such a critical, I think, piece of legislation that's been around for quite some time. This matters to me in many ways, having carried the bill for 4 terms, but beyond that. 1 in 4 people in America have a criminal record. And nearly all of us have broken the law or committed a crime. We just didn't get caught. So that's an important thing that when we consider what this means. My conviction came in 1976 when I was convicted for a felony burglary. I served 7 months. I was released early from my probation, and I thought I had lost my right to vote forever. And I would venture to guess if you polled 20 people that are out that had been convicted, that are even off probation, at least 19 of them would say they've lost their right to vote forever. So I applied for a pardon in 1981 and did receive a pardon. When House File 28 signed into law, roughly 50,000 people in Minnesota will be able to vote. And these are people that the Department of Corrections and the judicial system have deemed safe and not a threat to society. Long probationary periods in Minnesota are real. You all know them. You've been talking about probationary periods for the past few sessions. A reminder, most people vote where they live, And so if they live in a district that's red, they tend to vote red. If they live in a district that's blue, they tend to vote blue. Roughly half of the people that we're talking about live outside of Ramsey and Hennepin County. Majority research shows that this pro-civic engagement enhances public safety. It's time for Minnesota to pass this. Currently, 2 states and D.C. allow people to vote while they are currently incarcerated. 21 states allow people to vote when released or under supervision, out working in society, and 7 other states allow partial voting. Just rather quickly, I carried the bill in 2014. It had bipartisan support. I've had bipartisan support every time I had the bill, and I think it's time for Minnesota to join states like Indiana, Utah, and North Dakota to allow those out in public to participate in democracy and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Radine. Next on the list is Willie Lloyd, and please come to the table, to the testifying table. And after Willie Lloyd will be Zeke Caliguri. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
I'm Willie Lloyd. Good morning, Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. I am honored to have the opportunity to talk to you about HF 28 and how the absence of such a bill has adversely impacted my life. I sit here before you as someone who has been formerly impacted by the criminal justice system. But in spite of that, I've been an American my whole life. And just like some of you, I'm a spouse, a husband, a proud father of a 14-year-old daughter. And like some of you, I'm a businessman, a homeowner, a mentor, philanthropist, and I just so happen to be fortunate to work in the most noblest profession, and that is of a teacher. I've been teaching now for over 12 years. Over 5,000 students have came through my classroom. I am a leader in my community. But unlike you, I don't have a voice. Unlike you, I've been made to feel like a second-class American because I can't vote. I humbly request and ask that you bring your full weight and might behind HF 28. Because as we all know, in America, there's nothing more un-American than taxation without representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie Lloyd. Next on the list is Zeke Caliguri, and after Zeke Caliguri will be Secretary of State Steve Simon. Welcome to the committee. When you are seated, please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Zeke Caliguri. I do community outreach with Minnesota Justice Research Center. I am also homecoming after a long period of time incarcerated myself. And like Mr. Lloyd, I too am an American and have been an American my entire life. Last fall, I worked with a constituency of formerly incarcerated men and women who organized a campaign to register people to vote, to get people out to the ballots in a nonpartisan effort to get as many re-enfranchised, formerly felony convicted individuals to the polls. In 2015, I was a part of a letter writing campaign that supported this bill. I was currently incarcerated at the time. Even in 2016, I was a part of another organizing situation to register our family members to vote. What those campaigns taught me was that it reinforced what I already knew, was that the people in those places, the people coming out of those places, they care about their vote, and they care about their community. They care about what happens in these communities. You'd be surprised to understand how civically engaged some of the members of those communities are, and likely they are watching today. We lived in some particularly inhumane environments, and out of it, I'm proud to say that I maintained and recognized my own humanity as well as the humanity of other people in those places during that time. Did not allow it to destroy us. Instead, what we have now is a responsible community that are teachers, that are engineers and welders and electricians, but are also artists and are also heavily engaged in these sorts of matters.
Please conclude your testimony in 1 or 2 sentences.
Absolutely. What we are coming to is that this isn't a moral matter. It's a matter of humanity, and it's a matter of reinvesting in the humanity of people coming out who believe in this and believe in the process. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on the list is Secretary of State Steve Simon, and after Secretary Simon will be Elliot Howard. Welcome back to the committee, Secretary Simon. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. I want to thank Representative Frazier for his leadership. As he said, he stands on the shoulders of many, including Representative Dean. It was great to see him, and he has a compelling personal story. It is time, members, to restore the right to vote to those who have left prison behind. Keep in mind who exactly we're talking about, these tens of thousands of Minnesotans. These are folks who someone, a judge, a jury, someone has determined is good enough, safe enough, worthy enough, a sound enough risk to be among us every day, putting their lives together, working, raising families, integrating back into the community. And I want to assure you, as I hope the personal stories have convinced you, this is not an act of charity towards these tens of thousands of Minnesotans. This is very much in everyone's interest, all of our interest, yours, your constituents, because we know that people who come back into the community after being incarcerated are far less likely to reoffend if they feel some sense of ownership, some sense of investment in the community. And this is surely among the very biggest forms of ownership and investment. There are many compelling personal stories which supersede anything I could say here today. But let me just say one historical note, Mr. Chair, that's worth noting, I think, for the record. At the time of Minnesota statehood, there were fewer than 75 felonies on the books in Minnesota law. Now there are over 350 felonies on the books in Minnesota law. And the unmistakable trend over many decades has been to tilt sentences in favor of the probationary part of the sentence. So you have the perverse and I would say unjust situation where you have people who serve 1 or 2 years in prison. They are on probation or supervised release for decades and sometimes can't vote for decades. That makes no sense. It's time that we join states like North Dakota, like Iowa, like Florida, like Indiana, in making sure that we restore the right to vote for those who have already left prison behind and served their time. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. Next on the list is Elliot Howard, and after Elliot Howard will be Carly Stark. Welcome to the committee. Elliot Howard, please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Elliot Howard, and thank you for this opportunity. H.R. 28 will ensure that Minnesotans released from prison, having served their time, are welcomed home, not only as family and neighbors, but as citizens. Citizens who possess the right to vote, which, as the representative said earlier, is the cornerstone of our democracy. 8 years ago, I sat with a dozen members of my congregation in the church lounge, huddled around a cell phone. On speakerphone were inmates from Lino Lakes Prison. We at the church wanted to know about this legislation, and we wanted the opportunity, and we're blessed to have it, to ask those men how this legislation would benefit them once released from prison. And of course, being the dutiful church folk we were, we prepared our questions, we asked them, we took our notes. It was a succinct question and answer period on the topic of Restore the Vote. It ended in 15 minutes. At that point, participants on either side of the call could have ended the conversation. And I am still today, 8 years later, thankful that no one did. For what followed from there was not a formal, churchy kind of meeting or a quasi-research interview, but a conversation. A conversation among kindred spirits. At both ends of the phone were people who shared honest struggles, their own honest struggles on both ends of the conversation, about finding a better path for themselves and finding a little more light to see by. At both ends of the conversation were people who were working on themselves, and as Zeke had indicated in his testimony, were also working for the public good.
Please conclude your testimony in 1 or 2 sentences.
All right. I want to just say that the voting rights restoration for us as people of faith is a real way to put bones, to bring breath into elements of our faith, the lexicon of faith. And I'll close with this. Restoration, renewal, reconciliation, repair, return, yes, responsibility. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the list is Carly Stark. Please come down. And then after Carly Stark will be Naomi Gaines-Young. Welcome to the committee. Carly Stark, please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Carly Stark. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association of Community Corrections Act Counties, known as MACAC. I had to take a breath before I said the name of my organization. We provide probation for around 3/4 of the cases in Minnesota. It's a county-based probation system. I'm also the Public Safety Policy Analyst for the Association of Minnesota Counties. This is not, elections is not usually in my policy area, so you have a letter that includes Matt Hilgart, who is the expert on the elections side. So I'll mostly be speaking to the correction side of this. We support the restoration of voting rights to individuals that have been convicted of a felony once they've completed their term of incarceration. Our current system is confusing, which makes it difficult for both people on probation and elections officials to administer. House File 28 would make the law easier to understand and eliminate the administrative complexities of the current system. The bill would make the analysis simple. If you are incarcerated in a correctional facility, you cannot vote. If you are in the community, you can. Investigation, prosecution, probation, and other services related to enforcing ineligible voting is expensive and burdensome for agencies that are tasked with enforcing it. This bill would eliminate the need for investigation by local law enforcement of those who have unknowingly registered to vote or voted before their rights were restored. Speaking from the community supervision perspective, MACAC believes that allowing probation clients to vote when in the community encourages active engagement in the community and supports pro-social activities, both of which have been shown through corrections research to increase the likelihood of success on probation. And when people succeed on probation, that means they leave the criminal justice system, they have jobs, they live in the communities, and they become a part of the community, which reduces crime and ultimately protects victims long term.
Please conclude your testimony in 1 or 2 sentences.
Yeah, I only had 1 sentence left. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Frazier, for authoring this bill. And on behalf of our organizations, we ask that you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Carly Stark referenced a letter. It is in your agenda packet along with several others. I would encourage you members to take a look at those, and members of the public, those are available on the committee website as well. Next on the list is Naomi Gaines-Young, and after Naomi Gaines-Young will be Ryan Hamilton. Naomi Gaines-Young, when you get to the table, please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Naomi Gaines-Young. I am an organizer and post-release support specialist for Minnesota Freedom Fund and a formerly incarcerated individual. I want to echo the words earlier of Representative both Frazier and Craft, who echoed that we are all better when we participate in the political process. But let me tell you else what is also called upon us to do, to have a responsibility, to lend our voice, to improve the conditions in our communities, to feel part of something greater than myself, and it also says I belong. It is extremely rare in Minnesota that sentences are given without life without parole. So most of the people you have in your prisons are coming out. They're getting out. And why not tap into that political power of the individuals coming out? But here's a more important reason, and this was also echoed earlier, is that when someone feels a part of the community, when they feel they belong, when they feel they have a say in what goes on, they are firmly planted in that community. They don't return to prison. If they're given the right, the just ability to prove themselves and that they can make a meaningful contribution to the community. So let's start by restoring this vote. That is the beginning of this process. And later we can work on the other civil rights that are currently denied to individuals, such as housing. If you have a criminal history, you cannot live somewhere. Just this week, me and my husband were denied housing because of my criminal record. My husband doesn't have a criminal record, I do. But yet we can't, even though I've improved my life, even though I remain law-abiding, even though I am more financially independent to elevate in my life, I cannot do so because of my criminal history. But the beginning of this process can start with restoring the vote of people who are newly released from custody. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next testifier is Ryan Hamilton. Please come down, Ryan Hamilton, and after Ryan Hamilton will be Dane Smith. Welcome to the committee. When you've seated yourself, please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Chair Freiberg and members of the committee, good morning. I'm Ryan Hamilton, Government Relations Associate for the Minnesota Catholic Conference. The Minnesota Catholic Conference is proud to be a part of the Restore the Vote Coalition and would like to express our support for Rep. Frazier's House File 28. Pope Francis has said, "Where there is no mercy, there is no justice." The Catholic Church has consistently advocated for responses to crime that do not simply punish, but rehabilitate and restore. We must ask whether disenfranchising felons, after the courts have allowed them to return to their families and communities, serves any positive criminal justice purpose, or is it merely punishment for punishment's sake? There is no doubt that justice-involved individuals face significant collateral consequences once they leave prison. The inability to vote and have a say in the public decisions that affect their families is just another stumbling block for those trying to reconcile themselves to their communities. The restoration of voting rights is a critical step in giving people legitimate chances to forge new paths in their lives. Catholics believe that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Offering a second chance to justice-involved individuals, as Secretary of State Simon said, it serves the common good of all Minnesotans. Please vote aye on favorable passage of House File 28. Thank you, Rep. Frazier, for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Next on the list is Dane Smith, and after Dane Smith will be Munira Muhammad. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself once again and proceed with your testimony.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, my name is Dane Smith, and I'm here today representing Clean Elections Minnesota. One of our primary missions is to ensure maximum voter participation. We strongly urge members to support House File 28, welcoming these estimated 50,000 Minnesotans back into our democracy and society and restoring their sacred civil rights is the right thing to do for them, but also for us. Studies show that restoring civil rights helps reduce recidivism and thus improves public safety. These folks work, as many have pointed out, pay taxes, raise families, and they worship, just as we do. Restoring their rights restores their dignity, hastens their return to productive and rewarding lives, and making them whole again will make our community stronger. I'd like also to point out that at least more than 20 states recognize these benefits and already extend this right. We think it's important to note the bipartisanship reflected in these 22 states. The list includes red states such as North Dakota, Montana, Utah, Indiana, Ohio, blue states such as California and New York, and purple or swing states such as Nevada, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Support for this provision also comes from many, perhaps dozens of Minnesota nonpartisan and nonprofit organizations, and many, perhaps scores of churches and religious denominations. Together, they far outnumber nonpartisan nonprofits that oppose the measure. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our final testifier is Munira Mohammed. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Freiberg and members of the committee. My name is Munira Mohammed. I am the Policy Associate for the ACLU Minnesota. That's the American Civil Liberties Union, a longstanding organization devoted to protecting our individual civil liberties and civil rights enshrined in our Constitution. I'm going to echo what a lot of people have said here, so I'm going to be very brief. We're here to speak in support of House File 28 regarding the restoration of civil rights. It's clear that our ability to choose our government is fundamental to our democracy. But today we have a situation where thousands of Minnesotans who live in our communities, work, raise families, pay taxes, are barred from the most basic of civic engagement, voting. 55,000 Minnesotans have been released from prison, are still denied the right to vote. This is made even more egregious when we take into consideration Minnesota's history and pattern of trapping individuals in decades-long probation and supervision sentences. It's an incredible travesty that finishing your prison sentence and becoming part of the community isn't enough to show that one has paid their due to society. In fact, the state continues to punish those who've been into prison with massive disenfranchisement. If the goal is to truly rehabilitate people and have them become part of society again, then they need to have a voice and the ability to fully participate in civic life. The ACLU of Minnesota has advocated on voting restoration for many years now in the Capitol and in the courts. As you'll know, we have ongoing lawsuit on this and in the community. We are grateful to this committee for hearing this bill and hope the legislature will continue to work towards protecting Minnesota's rights and the right of people to vote in all circumstances. We urge you to pass House File 28. Thank you to the chair and members.
Thank you for your testimony. So thank you. Member, it's time for a member discussion. Is there any? Representative Torkelson, then Representative Agbaje. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd love to ask a question of Representative Dean. I just think he should come down.
Former Representative Dean, could you please return to the testimony? Representative Torkelson, proceed with your question.
Well, he may not be able to answer this question, but I just wanted to welcome him back to the legislature. It's been a while. So,
we all.
You know, I would like to explore a little bit the differences between Minnesota when it comes to sentences and the use of probation compared to other states. Representative Dean, do you have any information along those lines?
Ray Dean.
Mr. Chair and Representative Torkelson, that has not been my area of study, but Minnesota is typically a state that uses long sentences of probation beyond what other states do. And one of the reasons I think this is critical, and I know that in the legislature these past few years, you've been talking a bit about probationary sentences and what happens. Studies have shown that if any recidivism happens when someone's out on supervision or under probation, it usually happens within the first 3 years. So what that means is someone that has a 20-year probation, they're not likely to reoffend because if they were going to, it generally would have happened within those first few years. So I think that the thought has always been Minnesota has a fairly low incarceration rate, one of the lowest in the country, but it has the highest probationary rate. So we use things a little different than other states do.
Representative Torkelson, follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I use the term representative because my understanding is that we refer to someone by the highest office they have reached. And while I fully understand that Representative Dean is no longer an active representative, I choose to honor him with the title in spite of that.
My mistake.
You did point out that that Minnesota, while we're certainly on the high end when it comes to the utilization of probation and the length of probationary and supervision, we are also on the low end when it comes to incarceration. And this is something I haven't had a chance to explore, but I believe there are felons who, while convicted of a felony, never go to prison. Am I understanding that correctly? And how will they be treated? Perhaps this is a question for the author, but either of you could enlighten me on this question.
Mr. Chair and Mr.
Representative
Turkelson, I will definitely defer to the author of the bill.
Representative Frazier.
Thank you for the question, Representative Torkelson. Yes, there are individuals that may be convicted of a felony and never actually end up incarcerated. The way this would work with those individuals is that the moment that they are convicted or they take a plea deal and they are given a sentence for their conviction of the felony, if they are not incarcerated, they would have the ability, they would be eligible to vote.
Representative Torkelson,
Thank you,
a
Mr.
final
Chair.
follow-up. I'd like to get to as many member questions as possible.
I understand. So if someone is not sentenced to prison, but is given a probation and they then violate probation, what happens to their voting rights in that case?
Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Torkelson, if they violate that probation and then they are then incarcerated, they will lose that right to vote.
Thank you. Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Frazier, for bringing this bill. It's great to see so many members of the community out here supporting this. I just want to continue to reiterate my support for this bill. So many members of our community have served their time, and when they're out, they are participating in our society, and the right to vote just makes them want to participate more and want to be stronger members in our community. And so I continue to applaud these efforts. I think if I had a question, it would just be if you could explain a little bit further, Representative Frazier, the educational aspect about this, once people receive their right to vote, how the corrections systems will inform people, and what other education programs will be available to let people know that their right has been restored.
Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Agbaje, for the question and for those supportive words. The way the bill was laid out is that the correctional facility or the lead of the correctional facility will have to provide information to the individual once they are departing the incarceral state, that they have their voting rights restored. They're also to supply them with a voter registration application so they can get the process started to register to vote. We're also requiring the Secretary of State to gather informative information to provide to the courts and to those correctional facilities, informing them of what the rights are of those individuals once they leave the incarceral state.
Thank you. Representative Coulter.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but I really just want to say that I am, as a new member of this body, I'm really proud that this is one of the first bills that I'm going to get to vote out of committee. This is right morally. My wife grew up at a Lutheran church camp in rural southern Minnesota and reminded me that this concept has its roots in biblical values. But it's also right from a policy perspective. As many folks have noted, folks who are released from incarceration are far, far less likely to recommit if they are given ownership over their community, if they are full-fledged members of the community. And right now, these are folks who pay taxes. They pay sales taxes, income taxes, Social Security taxes, gas taxes, and yet they are not entitled to that full measure, of citizenship. And I guess that just does not sit well with me. And I think that it's something that is just going to be a positive benefit for the entire state. And the final thing I would mention, and there were comments made earlier about proposals from this committee being sort of bipartisan. And I guess I would just sort of ask a general question, what our definition of bipartisan really is. As has been noted, this would put us on the same platform as such notable blue and progressive bastions as Indiana, Louisiana, Montana, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, and Utah. And more locally, I know that this bill from my previous work has also been championed by now former Senator Dan Hall, who, those of you who know him, would hardly mistake him as a liberal socialist. I think, the question is, what does it mean to be bipartisan? Does it mean that it's supported by everyone in this committee and in the full House, in the legislature, or does it mean something broader? Does it mean that regardless of political persuasion, this is something that folks can get behind and that folks can support? And I think we have ample evidence that that is absolutely the case. So I'm again really, really proud to be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Coulter. There was a error on we missed a testifier, so with members' indulgence, this testifier came up from Red Wing, so I'm going to invite her to come down to speak. So I apologize for that. Is there a Vicki Lampert here? Okay, sure. If you could keep your remarks to 2 minutes. We can go maybe a couple minutes over. I do have 2 members left on the question, so I apologize for bypassing you there. But please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Vicki Lambert, and I'm from Red Wing. And I'm a deacon in the Episcopal Church, and I appreciate this opportunity. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak. I grew up in a rural community and have lived in Red Wing for more than 2 decades. I'm an educator and served the state of Minnesota as a teacher in the Department of Corrections for 17 years. I come to you today to testify for Restore the Vote. My faith has grounded me in the reality that every single human is a beloved child of God. They are worthy of dignity, respect, and having their voice heard and valued in our democracy. And I believe that Minnesota can live into this idea. People who have experienced incarceration deserve to experience restoration and redemption in our society. Restoring their rights of citizenship restores them of their voice and dignity. Restored people restore communities. You heard that earlier. Minnesota, as you know, disenfranchises over 50,000 people of our beloved neighbors by preventing them from voting until they get off paper. And this disproportionately impacts Minnesotans of color. And you have already heard from several formerly incarcerated persons. I've seen hundreds of boys and men stripped of their dignity in prison. They're often victims of trauma in an unforgiving world. And I noticed how they felt so discouraged that they still felt unworthy and disenfranchised because they were not allowed to operate as full citizens once their time of incarceration was served.
Please.
In my own family, I have seen the negative impact on extended probation. My own family has indicated a disgust with this system, which has intentionally excluded him from participating, as well as the other negative impacts that he's experienced, such as difficulties renting and finding employment.
Please conclude your testimony in 1 or 2 sentences.
We have a responsibility to fulfill the most basic promise of our democracy. And I haven't heard the state of Maine, which has never restricted voting rights from anyone, regardless of their incarceration. Now is the time, ladies and gentlemen, to restore voting rights for all of these over 50,000 Minnesotans. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So with that, we'll revert to member questions. I have Representative Greenman and then Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Frazier, for bringing this bill, and Representative Dean, and the folks who have worked on this. And I just want to say I will save my questions for later, but thank you for being here. We heard from a testifier that what this is about is a responsibility to participate, to make communities better, and a saying that you belong. You belong here. Your voices belong here. They belong here at the center of our policymaking process, at the center of our political process. And so I just want to really appreciate all the work that's gone into doing this, the Restore the Vote Coalition, and know that it is, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning on a very slippery Wednesday, and there's a reason that this hearing room is full. And so I just want to thank you and thank all of you for being here, participating, and believing in our democracy, that we can bend the arc. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I was confused by some semantics in a previous testifier who said that when they're released from incarceration, they're released from criminal justice system. I always thought, and I think the government, budgeting, et cetera, consider probation officers and the people that are handling the release as still part of the criminal justice system. I thought that there were also some other rights that were lost when you're on probation, some rights of freedom, and some of the search criteria is loosened so that if you're on probation, they don't need a warrant to, search your car or, other. And it'd be nice to understand what different rights or lessened rights are present when you're on probation. So it'd be nice maybe if staff could give that to the people. I'd also, through this discussion, I would like to find out what people are thinking of what serious crimes really aren't, they're trivial, so they shouldn't be a felony. If probation is long, why aren't we looking at addressing that? Because I think that's a broader impact on people. So, it mainly go to the people who have been testifying and the people outside groups that have sent the letters. Because if the system is, so broke and we're such an outlier, we really should be, looking at those questions and addressing. But frankly, I was surprised. I thought there was we heard plea deal. I thought there was a discrepancy and disparity in the people that get the probation instead of incarceration. The people that maybe have a shorter sentence and get probation because they don't have a good lawyer, they're not connected. And I thought there were people who were being disenfranchised by, the sentencing and, being in incarceration. But apparently, that's not an issue in Minnesota, because if it still is, we're not addressing that, we're furthering the disparity that the, poor, unconnected people from certain groups are suffering in the sentencing, and you're sort of rubbing their face in it by saying, well, you're spending your time in jail instead of on probation. So, we aren't caring about you. We are focused on the connected people that got the plea deals, the special consideration, and we're going to give them, back the right to vote, even though they haven't finished their sentence. But it's just because their sentence isn't incarceration in prison. It's the special plea deal they got because they could afford a good lawyer. So we are maybe not addressing the actual root cause of a problem. We're just doing some window dressing, and then we're actually, I fear, looking at widening the disparity in treatment of certain citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Quam. In terms of other rights that are taken away during the period of probation, this bill is being referred to the Public Safety Committee, so that seems like an appropriate discussion to occur there. We are a few minutes past our time, so I'll turn it to Representative Frazier. If you have any response to Representative Quam's comments, you're welcome to make them, and then you can proceed to your closing remarks as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Quam, for your comments. Public safety is the place to have that conversation. And your comments have, I will say, encouraged me, because if I'm hearing you say you want to work on criminal justice reform to ensure that we eliminate some of the disparities that we have, I will happily work on you with that. And if we can consider that to be bipartisan, let's do that in a bipartisan manner and get that done. But today we're here to talk about restoring the voting rights to individuals that are no longer incarcerated. And as we heard from testimony today from our faith community leaders, from individuals that have been impacted by our criminal justice system in a disproportionate manner, we know how important this is. And I couldn't close better than what was said by the individual that came down from Red Wing to testify. What she said was, restored people restore communities. That is what this is about. Restoring individuals so they can continue to pour the good back into their communities, back into their families, and stay engaged. That is the most important thing, and that is something that we should be engaged on here and very, very supportive behind and united behind that. So I'm hoping to get everyone's vote in this committee as we move this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will renew my motion that House File 28 be re-referred to the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, with that, the motion carries. The bill is referred.